Good morning, little ones of all saints. This is my little dog, Augie. He's going to come join us for a little bit, maybe. But I have a story to tell you about today's gospel. Now, today's gospel comes from Matthew. It's the first book in the New Testament. And today, we're learning about a story that Jesus tells us. And he's talking to us about conflict. And conflict kind of looks like when you or your sibling is arguing, or you and your friend is arguing, or you and a classmate is arguing. And Jesus kind of gives us a little bit of a formula, or a puzzle in some ways, of how to handle conflict. The first thing that he says is, if a friend hurts you, go to them in private and tell them how they've hurt you. And if they don't listen to you in that moment, Jesus says, bring a friend or two with you to help share your story of how they've hurt you. And if they don't listen then Jesus says, go tell someone higher. In the gospel this morning, he says the church, but that could be a teacher, that also could be a principal, it could be someone in your school, or it could be a parent with your sibling. So we have those three ways, and he says if they don't listen to all those three ways, then treat them as someone else that is among the community. He uses the word Gentile or tax collector. And then he concludes this gospel by saying, when 2 or 3 are gathered, I am among them. So Jesus ends that gospel by saying, even in these times when it's painful or you've been hurt and you have to do this confrontation that you may not want to do, Jesus is there among them. And so this week I thought a lot about puzzles, and that's why I brought this puzzle alongside with me. Because puzzles, I think, are really helpful in understanding that. And I can take these pieces off, and they come apart. And in this puzzle, the pieces are big, and it's a puzzle of our church, and we kind of know what they look like. But when these are all off the board, it's kind of hard. You can see them sitting on the floor, like we don't know exactly where they go. But we can think about how Jesus kind of gives us different puzzle pieces. And we put them together, and this one can say about when you speak to the person that's hurt you alone, you can put it into the puzzle. And then this one can be about when you bring a friend or two to help you. And he puts it into the puzzle, and look, I'm already kind of struggling to put the piece in. I think I put it in backwards. And so we put that on the puzzle. And this one could be about you telling someone a higher authority or a higher person, like a parent or a teacher or a principal, or the church. And so you put this one in. Let's see how it goes. I think it fits in just like this. Okay, and so then those 3 pieces are in the puzzle, but we still have 2 pieces missing, and I don't know where those pieces are. And so kind of thinking about how we've heard stories that Jesus has told us is we haven't gotten this kind of practical, very concrete pieces that we put together. And that's not normally how we hear stories about Jesus. We normally hear stories that are in what we call parables, where it talks about things that happened long ago with things we may not see in our daily lives, like mustard seeds or grapevines or something like that. And we've not really heard stories like this, that we have practical understandings of, that we can relate to on a more deeper level. And so I think the important thing here is that we have to think about what's the other meaning from what's directly told to us. What's the meaning behind the meaning, per se? And in the way that Matthew tells the story versus how I told it, Matthew uses the word listen. He says, if you go to this person and they don't listen to you, and he repeats that word, listen, listen, every single time on these 3 steps he's given us. And I think that's the important part here. Jesus is teaching us how to listen. And I did a puzzle in May back with my parents, and each of us had a different way we wanted to do the puzzle. My dad wanted to make sure all these edge pieces on the outside here, that those were done first. And my mom, she wanted to group all the blue pieces together and all the yellow pieces together. So then we could put those pieces together and then put the rest of the puzzle together. And me, I was very, very practical, I thought, in the way I wanted to do the puzzle. If I saw that this piece and this piece went together, then I wanted to put them together. And then I wanted to do it piece by piece, just like that. And each of us did the puzzle a little bit differently. But in the end, we got the puzzle together. And that's kind of how conflict kind of is. Jesus is giving us one example of how to do things. But we know that putting a puzzle together, there's many different ways to do it. And those are just 3 pieces he gave us. And so, but Jesus emphasized that word listen that I said earlier, that we got to listen to one another, because my mom and my dad and I were all putting this puzzle together, and we had to listen to how each other were putting the puzzle pieces together. Because if we didn't, we would have a big mess. We would lose pieces like we have here, where you don't have 2 pieces in it, and we wouldn't be able to finish the puzzle. And that's kind of what Jesus is telling us. We got to listen to one another. And he uses those 3 steps to remind us that that person isn't listening. And Jesus says, no, you need to listen. Listen to one another, especially in those times when someone has hurt you. Listen. And he's calling us to do this listening work because we're telling stories. Jesus told us stories. We tell stories every day. And so he wants us to hear those other people's stories, just like he wants us to hear the story from Matthew. So this week, I'll ask you to go listen to new stories. Maybe that's you read a new book you haven't read. Or maybe that's you talk to a new friend. Or you call someone you haven't talked to in a while. Hear their story. Because that's what Jesus is really asking us to do, is hear the story of someone else and tell ours. So think about, these are 2 missing puzzles into our puzzle. What do we need to fill those pieces? What stories do we need to put into these pieces to tell the story of Jesus, to tell the story of his creation, to tell the story of his people? What are those stories? I ask you to go listen and tell me what they are. Go in peace.